For a long time, Germany has been synonymous with high-end engineering. The country's industry, robust and reliable, has helped the European nation make a name internationally. Moreover, it has also helped the country grow considerably in the last decades and become one of the biggest economies in the world. The outstanding growth has also impacted its European neighbours, which have enjoyed a considerable boost thanks to the impulse of the German economy. Today, however, the German economy is in a pickle. The country's 5 main economic research and analysis institutes have sharply lowered their forecasts for 2024. If half a year ago the German economy was expected to grow 1.3%, now the forecast has been cut to just 0.1%. A demotion of the expectations for the nation's economic future that many are afraid might end up affecting its European neighbours. But why is Germany in such a bad economic shape? Moreover, how will it drag down the EU's economy? Proof of Germany's economic might is that in 2023, after surpassing Japan, the country became the 3rd biggest economy in the world. Within the European Union, German dominance is even more striking. It is not only the Union's main economic juggernaut, it is also 1.2 trillion bigger than the second, France. And that means that the Teuton's GDP makes up 24% of the club's total. A position of economic dominance that has allowed the Central European country to lend part of its economic might to its continental neighbours for a long time. If the country has been such an economic powerhouse, part of the merit rests with its powerful industry. Responsible for 26.6% of the GDP in 2021, German manufacturing is dominated by industries that require a great deal of engineering expertise. As such, its industry is dominated by 4 sectors, producing very high value-added products: the automotive, the mechanical engineering, the chemical industry, and the electrical industry. These industries together employed 7.5 million Germans in 2020. However, the country's industry is experiencing a persistent downturn. In 2023, the industrial production of Germany dropped 1.2%, its second decline in a row after dropping an additional 0.2% the previous year. According to the industry's main lobby, the group BDI, 2024 might end up looking even bleaker for German-made industrial products. Their forecast is that the production might fall an additional 1.5%, marking a total decrease of almost 2% in the last 3 years. This fall has been years in the making, and there are a few reasons behind it. Germany's economic governance has always been known by its adscription to fiscal austerity, a vision of how public finances should be run that the Eurozone's first economy has been relentlessly trying to export to its European Union peers for the best part of the last 2 decades. A vision nonetheless that today may be hurting the German economy more than it is helping it. This austerity is enshrined in the country's constitution. As such, Germany's constitution establishes that the nation can never incur a fiscal structural deficit higher than 0.35% of its GDP. In establishing so, the laws effectively ban the country's government from spending much over what can be funded by tax collections. In the last example of the application of this rule in 2023, Olaf Scholz's coalition government were banned from using 869 billion euros that were sitting in special funds to pay for a part of its legislative agenda by the country's Supreme Court. A move that forced Scholz's government to cut down expenses to avoid creating a hole of 20 billion euros in the national budget. The problem is that public expenditure has traditionally been one of the tools that countries have had to fight economic adversity and stimulate domestic consumption. And because of that, the government's hands are tied when dealing with the economy. Moreover, On top of the lack of resources to stimulate its economy, the country has been suffering from an episode of persistent inflation, created, at least in part, by an energy crisis that started with a decades-old decision. In order to understand the scale of Germany's energy crisis, it is important to go back in history a little. That is because much of Germany's current economic woes can be attributed to a major shift the country had to undergo to fix a decades-old political decision. On the 1st of February of 1970, a Sunday, Germany and the Soviet Union signed an agreement, a deal that would allow for the first gas pipeline to be laid between the two countries. It was a pivotal moment that came after 9 months of high-level negotiations. In doing so, the government of the Federal Republic of Germany, under the mandate of Chancellor Willy Brandt, was applying the Ostpolitik, a doctrine that bid on building friendlier relations with the USSR in the middle of the Cold War. The West Germany's government decision was met with discreet but close scrutiny on the part of NATO, which the country had joined in 1955. The alliance wanted to know about the security implications of such a deal and sent an inquiry to the German government. The gas department from the Ministry of Economy responded, "Germany is never to rely on Russia for even 10% of its gas needs." This political decision gave Germany access to a considerable supply of cheap gas, which in exchange allowed the country to greatly grow its economy for almost 50 years. However, a little over half a decade later, Germany had developed a heavy dependence on Russian gas. It was, moreover, not only heavily reliant on Russia for gas supply, but for most of its energy needs. In December 2021, just a few months before the Kremlin decided to invade Ukraine, the Germans imported 32% of the total gas they used for the month from Russia, but also 34% of its crude oil and 53% of its hard coal. From one day to another, Berlin was forced to address its decades-long addiction to Russian energy. In many regards, Germany was ripe for the energetic disruption to have an outsized effect on its economy. The Russian invasion of Ukraine and the European resolve to hit the Russians back with economic sanctions left Germany in a tough position. It was, in any case, relatively lucky, as the 2022-2023 winter turned out to be warm enough to allow the country to reduce its energy needs by 20%. However, the country was still facing the need to find a new supply in order to stave off the Russian energy income. As such, in 2023, the country signed a contract with the Norwegian energy company Equinor to have 60% of its gas needs met by its energy. The solution, of course, has pros and cons. On one side, Germany has been able to severely cut down its dependency on Russian energy. On the other, the Germans are today still dependent on other countries to be able to power their economy. The sanctions against Russia had another consequence. There was an energy shortage that affected much of Europe. This caused a sharp increase in energy prices. In the whole EU, the energy annual inflation reached 41.1% in 2022, which amounted to an increment of 14.1% between January 2022 and August. In the case of Germany, the difference in the price of gas between 2020 and 2022 was even more dramatic. In October, at its peak, the price of gas was 127.2% higher than it was 2 years prior. At the same time, electricity prices also spiked to reach almost a 30% increase compared with 2020. This price jump has, ever since, been a constant in Germany. As such, in May 2024, natural gas prices in the country were still 91.1% higher than in 2020. The problem with sudden increases in energy prices for an economy like Germany is that they profoundly damage the competitiveness of its industry. This is because industrial economies are very energy-intensive, and the over-reliance on Russian gas the country developed throughout decades can have long-lasting effects on the German economy. Besides that, the spike in energy prices has also constrained the country's internal demand, damaging the economic situation of the Teuton country even more. In this context, indicators that are normally used to assess trust in an economy, such as the Purchasing Managers Index, have been in decline for a few years. This indicator, for example, sits now at 43.2, far from the 66.6 that the country had at the peak of the COVID recovery in April 2021. Seeing this, the country risks becoming once again the sick man of Europe, a title it sported in the 90s while still hurting from the Cold War and the division of its territory after the World War. A risk that moved the CEO of the Deutsche Bank to warn in September 2023 that if structural changes are not made, the country risks actually becoming the sick man of the continent. Yet, the main troubling threat of Germany's sluggish economy is the effect it may end up having over the economies of its EU neighbours, a threat both the International Monetary Fund and the OCDE have warned about, and that may be already underway. The second and third economies of the Eurozone, France and Italy, could be the first victims of this scenario, with a meagre growth of 1% and 0.7% predicted respectively for 2024. Both Rome and Paris can be already suffering from the German contagion effect. Other European countries, especially those in the south, keep growing nonetheless. Spain, Portugal, Greece, Malta, and Cyprus all have positive economic forecasts for 2024 and 2025. Yet, according to the experts, they might not have the ability to lift the economy of the rest of the EU. And that will mean that the sick man of Europe has indeed infected its neighbours.